Welcome back to episode 4 of the Movie Comparison Podcast, where we analyze movie adaptations of your favorite books and see which one is most faithful to the book. Last week, we looked at Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and compared the 1971 film with the 2005 film. This week, we'll be looking at The Great Gatsby, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald and published in 1925.
I chose the 2013 film adaptation, and Holden here chose the 1974 film. Our goal is to determine which movie is more faithful to the key elements of the original novel so we can provide you with the best movie recommendation. Alright, Holden, how about we start by comparing the overall moods from each of our movies? You go first.
Well, Safe, I have to say, the mood of my movie was pretty spot on when compared to the mood of the book. The mood isn't excessively upbeat to any degree, highlighting the surface level of glamour in the 1920s, and does so at a good enough amount to contrast the dark reality of pessimism and gloom concealed by the former. For example, the extravagant parties held by Gatsby evoke an exciting and joyous mood, shown in the quote describing his parties. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings of the champagne and the stars. But under this gloomy reality, that in order for Gatsby to have made the money to fund those parties, he had to turn to an illegal bootlegging operation in the midst of prohibition that was a point of tension in America. There are enough splashes and references to this reality that bring the gloom up to the surface and become clearly visible to the audience.
It's interesting. I noticed the mood of the 2013 movie to be quite consistently upbeat. There's an emphasis on the extravagance and luxury of the lifestyles of Tom, Daisy, Jordan, and Gatsby, as recounted to us by Nick. Even during the least happy scenes, when the mood of the characters was at a low, the overall mood wasn't quite pessimistic or gloomy like you said the 1974 version may have been. Gatsby's parties, for example, are extremely extravagant and are portrayed as extremely crowded and social parties, even incorporating things such as fireworks all within Gatsby's house. The exciting mood depicted in areas like Gatsby's parties are cleverly shown through rose-tinted glasses that shrouded the roaring 20s, which matches with partially nostalgic tone in the book that is acknowledged by Nick. Through all he said, even through his appalling sentimentality, I was reminded of something, an elusive rhythm, a fragment of lost words that I had heard somewhere a long time ago. Even the characters themselves seem more emotional and less monotone in the book. Tom, for example, is more upbeat and excited to see Nick, and at the same time, during his confrontation with Gatsby, an observation of a dead Myrtle, he's on the verge of tears. Overall, the mood of the 2013 film is accurate to the book, but diverges from the novel in its incorporation of modern elements such as contemporary music, visual effects, which add a layer of spectacle and theatrics to it.
Shall we move on to the next category?
Let's move on to motifs. The two biggest motifs in the novel are the green light at the dock of Tom and Daisy's house and the eyes of billboard Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. In the 2013 movie, the eyes of T.J. Eckelberg are portrayed multiple times on an old billboard in the Valley of Ashes, symbolizing God and his omnipotence and his all-seeing judgment. The quote, "God sees everything" by Wilson is often directly associated with the eyes of Eckelberg, and in the 2013 film they are shown in tandem with the quote. God himself is referenced multiple times in the movie as well. The green light motif is also portrayed well in the movie. Like in the book, Gatsby stares at the flashing green light at the dock of Daisy's house. This light symbolizes his desire for Daisy and his undying commitment to her love. The light continues to flash even after Daisy has chosen to stay with Tom and Gatsby has died, symbolizing Gatsby's undying love.
When it comes to motifs, their uses are normally determined by like a cookie-cutter standard, and there's not much reason to change them in the first place. And the 1974 movie kind of used this idea, and they took the two most prominent motives of the book, which was the undying green light across the bay and the all-seeing eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. So as far as motives go, both movies remain truthful to their source material. The quote from the book where Nick finds Gatsby staring across the bay, he stretched out his arms towards the dark water. I distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished. That is depicted well in the 1974 film towards the beginning of the movie.
I see. I agree that it doesn't really matter how the motif is portrayed exactly. As long as it is the same motif and it's executed well, the message pretty much remains the same.
Well, I guess we should move on to the next category, dialogue.
All right, then. Why don't you start us off?
Well, in the 1974 film, the dialogue is pretty similar to the book. The way the characters express themselves, such as Gatsby being overly proper with his little phrase of old sport, calling everyone old sport. Um, the conversations, they reflect on the mood, they reflect on the motifs and the message, such as the conversation between Nick and Gatsby towards the end, where Nick warns Gatsby that you can't repeat the past, and Gatsby replies with, "Why, of course you can." Much of the dialogue in the movie is taken straight from the book at significant points where the story and characters develop. Another dialogue similarity is that in both the movie and the book, Daisy is unbearable. One way the movie strays from the book, however, in this respect, is through the lack of consistent or common monologue from Nick, which is a core part of the book's development. While the amount of monologue Nick has in the book would be absurd to put in a movie, there is still ultimately an insufficient amount of it.
Wow. Dialogue in the 2013 movie is also pretty true to the text, with many lines coming directly from the book. Nick's inner monologue is a detail that I think this movie does pretty well. Very well, actually. Having him reflect on the story more than letting the story happen.
And it kind of superimposes the text on the screen. Sometimes it's kind of in that very 2013 style.
The whole movie is told by Nick after Gatsby's death to a therapist who suggests he write the story down. Although it adds the detail of the therapist, the whole idea of Nick reflecting on his encounter with Gatsby is carried through straight from the book. This being said, there are a few more differences. First of all, the dialogue is much more snappy. All the characters talk faster, it seems, and in general, the movie seems to move at a much faster pace than the book. Each character seems to be a bit more expressive in their dialogue as well than in the book, and more expressive than in the 1974 film, based on what you've told me. One example I remember is the scene where Gatsby first meets Daisy in Nick's cottage. In the novel, Gatsby nervously stumbles over his words as he tries to impress Daisy, expressing his longing for her and his desire to recapture the past. However, in the film, the scene is embellished with an additional dialogue and visual cues to heighten the more romantic tension between the characters, and Gatsby doesn't struggle as much to talk to Daisy and get over his fear. Gatsby delivers a more polished and eloquent speech, declaring his undying love for Daisy in a dramatic and impassioned manner. While the sentiment remains consistent with the novel, the specific phrasing and delivery of the dialogue are changed to evoke a more cinematic and emotionally resonant moment on screen that the audience could relate to more.
So you mentioned visual cues. Tell me, what were some of those? Safe.
The one example I remember is, it's not in the book, but in the 2013 film, Nick actually sees them, to get Gatsby to start talking to Daisy more, he decides to go out to the store and just to get them alone, so hopefully they'll talk more. And although Gatsby's very nervous about it and thinks the whole thing is a bad idea, he lets Nick go. And when Nick comes back, in order to show how entranced with each other Gatsby and Daisy are, Nick picks up pots and has to slam them together just to get their attention, which still doesn't work. And in the end, he has to make sounds with his mouth,
Like a
one of those to get their attention. So that's one example. Speaking of dialogue, how does the dialogue in your movie affect the characterization?
Well, the characterization in the 1974 movie was pretty faithful to the book. For starters, Nick's core beliefs of reserving judgment are used, but he also has his kind of limit where he has some eventual scorn for some people. And the normal people that he would have the scorn for, it doesn't necessarily apply to Gatsby, because he just kind of in the book he describes it as a successful personality is essentially what he says, and that's just kind of the idea that he has of Gatsby in the movie as well. And he said that Gatsby is exempt from the type of people he would normally dislike. Nick's vision of Gatsby is expressed in this description that he said he smiled understandingly much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with the quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced or seemed to face the whole external world for an instant. In this movie, Nick is heavily moralistic, cynical, and pessimistic at times, and not commonly expressive of excitement. Gatsby also remains faithful to the book, depicted initially as an enigmatic but popular figure that turns into a character brimming with hope, love, and undying optimism. The quote, "He talked a lot about the past, and I gathered he wanted to recover something, some idea of himself perhaps, that had gone into loving Daisy," is representative of that. He ends up a tragic character whom Nick believes to be better than Tom and Daisy put together. Daisy is very faithful to the book, so faithful she manages to be more hateable than in the novel. She is overly excited, she's flirty, she's floaty, angelic. She's got they describe it as like a voice of money in the book, and you can very much see that in the movie because it's ridiculously pretentious and over the top, and it's clear that she's kind of wearing this kind of mask. And when Gatsby re-enters her life, this mask begins to slip, and it threatens her stability, like the stability that she had gained and coped with the choices that she made and some of the grit that she would have had. And so, yeah, it just kind of slips. And past that point, it's even more developed that she's just shallow, she's insincere, and then at the end, Nick describes her as like an uncaring person and how she like hides behind her money after she pretty much got Gatsby killed. More or less it was Tom who did that, but Tom is also faithful to the book as well. He's an aloof brute who indulges in arrogant beliefs, and after having fallen from grace in his youth, he has a cruel body and is immoralistic, careless, hypocritical, and he's unfaithful. He's Nick in that same kind of sentence where he described Daisy as uncaring and, careless. He described Tom that way too. Jordan she's pretty faithful to the book. She's kind of like nonchalant and keeps up a steady appearance of wealth, despite the fact that she's kind of like faked her way to fame and wealth. Myrtle is pretty faithful to the book as well. She's just this unsatisfied, poor woman stuck in a marriage that she despises and longs for something more. And she finds this in Tom, but not really, because he doesn't value her. And he has no intention of leaving his wife for her. He hits her a lot. Well, a lot is assumed probably if he'd done it once, I guess. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of abusive to Daisy too. But she has all this ambition. She'll never get what she wants. And her husband is kind of foolish and oblivious to this for a while. He's poor, but he's still really optimistic in a way that Myrtle just isn't. And he does truly love Myrtle, and like Gatsby, this love is what gets him killed.
Oh, wow. That's interesting what you said. In the 2013 film, the characters are pretty accurate to the book, and I only noticed some slight differences. So for Nick, you said he maintains like a pretty pessimistic mood throughout the book, but I feel like in the 2013 film, it kind of transitions from hopeful to pessimistic as a result of his encounter with Gatsby, Jordan, Daisy, and Tom, and like how his opinion changed.
Daisy will do that to a fella.
Yep. While Gatsby is portrayed as like the epitome of hopefulness and sensitivity with an added emphasis on his mysterious nature and anxiousness around Daisy, his dedication to Daisy is attributed well in the movie. And I think it pays respect to the quote, "No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart," which is from the book. Tom Buchanan takes on a larger-than-life persona, exhibiting heightened arrogance, racism, which is all from the book, but he's just a little bit more upbeat, like I mentioned in the dialogue. Daisy is pretty accurate to the book, and she's presented as that quintessential golden girl with a little bit of a softer and less uplifting demeanor. Jordan, kind of in the same respect, but she lacks the same depiction of wealth as Daisy and is a little bit more curious and cynical the way she's depicted. Myrtle is depicted as ambitious and seductive, seeking an escape from her life with George, who is portrayed as like oblivious, like you said, but still caring, and then that makes him foolish and optimistic, which, like you said, leads to his death, as well as Gatsby's. These characterizations also like reflect, like I mentioned earlier, the heightened sense of drama and glamour that I think this movie has, which kind of deviates from the nuanced portrayals in the novel to emphasize the larger-than-life personas of the characters in the... Are you Are you okay? Did
Reasonably.
you fall out of your chair?
I don't know, say, did I?
What was I saying? Yeah, these characterizations reflect that heightened sense of drama and glamour and theatrics that I think this movie focuses on, and that's what I think it deviates from the most from the book, the nuanced portrayals in the novel and it kind of wants to emphasize the larger-than-life personas of the characters and pay more respects to the jazz age setting that the Roaring Twenties was.
Well, we're at our last topic that will help us determine which movie is more faithful to the book, and that is the message in the movie.
All right, so here's my thoughts. Both the film and the novel caution against the shallow pursuit of success and highlight the importance of authenticity and integrity in human relationships. However, the film places a greater emphasis on spectacle and visual extravagance, the 2013 film at that, showcasing the opulence and glamour of the jazz age in a way that is more overtly theatrical and cinematic than the novel. Also, the film's modernized elements such as contemporary music and added visual effects contribute to a more stylized and kinetic interpretation of the story, which may diverge from the subtlety and nuance of Fitzgerald's original text. And I think that's a choice that the filmmakers made to appeal to the audience more, but it also ends up diverging from the message a little bit.
All right, for the 1974 film, the message kind of remains constant. Gatsby's depiction of extravagance and wealth is symbolic of the more inclusive and exciting age of the 1920s, where everyone can start getting these huge loans, but they have interest, and obviously all this leads to the Great Depression. But that's really just how it appears on the surface, and there's just this dark reality that lies beneath it. It's just immoral. Nothing is perfect.
Oh, sorry. Slipped up in my chair. Continue.
I think you need a new chair. As I was saying, nothing is as perfect as it really seems, and just the rich are flawed and careless. And like I had mentioned before, Nick alludes to this when he says that they were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made. The best example of this is just really Tom and Daisy. In their own right, they serve as the truth of the 1920s because it's just they're causing the huge problems. They hide behind their money and they just do what they can to escape their mistakes. And that's just kind of like the undertones, and it's really it ends up being what leads to the downfall of everything. So, yeah.
Okay, Holden. Now that our final category is finished, it's time we decide which movie is more faithful to the novel. Want to go?
Yeah. Based on what we've kind of talked about, it seemed that the 1974 film was normally the better adaptation in the sense that it aligns closer to the original message of the book. While both films warn against the shallow pursuit of success and emphasize the importance of authenticity and integrity in human relationships, the 1974 adaptation, it kind of just has a darker and more cynical portrayal of the characters and themes. There's a stronger emphasis on the dark reality hidden beneath the surface of wealth and extravagance in the 1920s that you can see in the 1974 films. And the characters like Tom and Daisy are depicted as flawed and immoral individuals who use their wealth to evade accountability for their actions, which closely reflects the nuanced exploration of the jazz age depicted in F. Scott Fitzgerald's knowledge. The 2013 film adaptation, while capturing the original essence of the novel's message, leans more heavily on spectacle and visual extravagance, potentially diluting the subtlety and depth of Fitzgerald's original text. Therefore, based on these observations, the 1974 film would be my recommendation for the film that would align closer to the original message. What do you think, Saif?
I have to agree with you, Holden. Although I didn't watch the 1974 film, and I watched the 2013 film, which I enjoyed, I think based off what you said, the 1974 film is a great rendition of Fitzgerald's original text, and I think it upholds the original message that he was trying to get through a little bit better. But I think the 2013 film is still definitely worth a watch for you guys.
All right, well, I guess that's it.